Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Imagine just for a moment a world where a pretty common type of drug, one mainly used for human immunodeficiency virus,
Right.
might actually give people a significant shield against Alzheimer's disease.
Sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it?
It really does. But that intriguing possibility is exactly what we're going to get into today, based on some, well, quite compelling new research.
Yeah, we're looking at a study that just came out in Alzheimer's and dementia, and it explores this really surprising connection.
Between drugs for human immunodeficiency virus.
Yeah.
Specifically that class, the nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors.
Exactly those. And the finding, a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's. You kind of hints at a totally different way of thinking about it, maybe even, preventing it.
So our exploration today, it's based on the scientific paper itself, Association of Nucleoside Reverse Transcriptase Inhibitor Use with Reduced Risk of Alzheimer's Disease Risk by Meganoli and colleagues.
And also a health news report from UVA Health that covered this research.
And our mission really is to unpack the key info, explain the science clearly, without getting lost in the jargon.
So you can really grasp why this finding might be such a big deal.
Okay, so where did this idea even come from? What was the starting point for the researchers?
Well, it started with something they already knew about Alzheimer's. There's this link to inflammasomes.
Inflammasomes, right. Those are part of our immune system, involved in inflammation.
Exactly, key players. And they've been sort of implicated in how Alzheimer's develops.
Okay.
And the researchers also knew that these specific drugs, the nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which, by the way, are used for hepatitis B too, not just human immunodeficiency virus.
Right.
They knew these drugs can actually block those inflammasomes from activating.
Ah, okay. So connecting the dots, if the drugs block the inflammation pathway linked to Alzheimer's.
Then maybe, just maybe, people taking them might be less likely to get the disease. That was the big question.
So how did they go about trying to answer that? It sounds like a huge question to tackle.
It is. They needed a lot of data. So they turned to analyzing information from two really large health insurance databases in the U.S.
Tell us a bit about those databases. What kind of populations are we talking about?
Okay, so the first one was the United States Veterans Health Administration database. Huge amount of data, covering 24 years.
Wow.
But it's important to note that population is mostly men.
Right, okay. And the second one?
That was the MarketScan database. This one had 14 years of data, but from commercially insured patients, so a bit more of a maybe broader mix of people.
Using two different ones like that seems smart. You get different angles.
Yeah, it helps see if the finding holds up in different groups. If you see the same pattern in both, it makes the results stronger, potentially.
Despite the differences, like the veterans one being mostly older men, maybe with more health issues.
Exactly. And MarketScan being, well, commercially insured, maybe a bit different in terms of overall health or access to care. Seeing consistency across those adds weight.
Okay, so within those massive data sets, who were they focusing on?
They looked for people aged 50 or older.
Right.
Who were taking meds for either human immunodeficiency virus or for hepatitis B. And critically, they made sure none of them already had an Alzheimer's diagnosis when the study period started.
Got it. How many people did that end up being?
It was a pretty big group, over 270,000 patients in total.
That's a solid number. And what were they tracking over time for these individuals?
Two main things, really. First, did they eventually get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease during the years covered by the data?
Okay.
And second, how long had they been taking those specific drugs, the nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors?
So crunching all those numbers, looking at over 250,000 people, what did they find? Was the hypothesis right?
It seems like it might be. The analysis showed what the paper calls a significant and substantial reduction in Alzheimer's risk for the patients taking these specific drugs.
Significant and substantial. Okay, what does that look like in numbers?
Well, in the Veterans Health Administration database, they estimated that the risk of getting Alzheimer's went down by about 4% for every single year the person was taking those drugs.
4% per year. That could really add up over, say, 5 or 10 years?
It definitely could. And interestingly, in the MarketScan database, the one with the more diverse population, the reduction was even bigger, around 10.3% lower risk per year of taking the medication.
Wow, 10%. That's quite a difference between the two groups. Any idea why?
Well, it could be down to those population differences. We mentioned different health profiles, maybe different lifestyle factors,
Yeah.
even differences in how diagnoses are recorded. But the key thing is the trend was in the same direction in both.
A lower risk associated with these drugs in both databases. That's the main takeaway.
Exactly. And here's another really important piece. They looked at other types of human immunodeficiency virus medications too.
Like what?
Things like non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, protease inhibitors, integrase inhibitors, different ways of treating the virus.
And did they see the same effect?
No.
Ah.
That's the crucial part. Patients taking those other classes of human immunodeficiency virus drugs did not show the same reduced risk for Alzheimer's.
Okay, that's really interesting. It suggests it's not just about treating the virus itself, but something specific about this class of drugs.
Precisely. It strengthens that idea that the mechanism might be linked to how nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors affect those inflammasomes, that inflammation pathway.
So thinking bigger picture then, what are the potential implications if this finding holds up?
They're potentially huge. Based on these numbers, the researchers did a sort of back-of-the-envelope calculation.
Okay.
They estimate that if this effect is real and applies globally, using these drugs could maybe prevent around 1 million new cases of Alzheimer's every single year.
1 million cases a year. That's staggering, especially when you think about how many people develop Alzheimer's currently.
It really is. Over 10 million people worldwide develop it annually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, preventing even a fraction of those would be incredible. Current treatments mostly just manage symptoms, right?
Right. They slow things down maybe, but don't prevent it. This is a different angle entirely.
Completely different, focusing on prevention.
And beyond the human cost, which is obviously immense, there's the economic side too.
Oh, absolutely. The study report touched on that. The cost of Alzheimer's care is astronomical and rising fast.
I've seen those projections.
Yeah, in the U.S., they're talking about going from, what, $360 billion now to nearly $1 trillion a year by 2050.
Unbelievable.
So if these drugs could prevent or even just delay the onset of Alzheimer's for a significant number of people, the savings in healthcare costs could be enormous.
It really puts into perspective the value of finding preventative strategies. And you mentioned earlier the biological link, the inflammasomes.
This study adds more weight to that theory. The idea that inflammation in the brain, driven by these inflammasomes, is a key part of the Alzheimer's puzzle.
And the fact that these specific drugs happen to target those inflammasomes.
It gives a plausible reason why they might be protective. It's not just a random correlation. There's a potential biological story there. They're not just hitting the virus. They seem to be calming down this inflammation pathway linked to Alzheimer's.
Which logically leads to the next step, testing this directly.
Exactly. The researchers are very clear about this. They say these findings provide a really strong reason to set up proper clinical trials.
So, like, take people at risk for Alzheimer's.
Right. And give some of them these nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors and others a placebo, and then follow them over time to see if the drug group actually develops Alzheimer's at a lower rate.
That's the gold standard, isn't it? To prove cause and effect.
It is. That's how you move from observing a link in past data to knowing if the drug causes the benefit.
Okay, but we're not there yet. And like with any study based on looking back at existing records, there are limitations, right? We need to be careful.
Absolutely crucial, yes. This is an observational study. It shows an association, a link.
But correlation isn't causation, as they say.
Exactly. It doesn't prove the drugs cause the lower risk. There could be other things going on, other factors they couldn't measure or adjust for that explain the connection.
Like what kind of factors?
Oh, maybe subtle differences in lifestyle, diet, other medical conditions, access to preventative care, things that weren't fully captured in the insurance data. This kind of study is great for pointing researchers in a direction, but it can't give the final answer.
And we talked about the two databases being different. That's also a kind of limitation, or at least something to consider.
Yes, the VA population, mostly older men, possibly with more health issues, that's different from the commercially insured market scan group.
So the specific numbers, like the 4% versus 10% reduction.
You have to be cautious about applying those exact percentages universally. The encouraging part is the direction of the effect was the same in both distinct populations.
Okay. What about how Alzheimer's itself was identified? You mentioned it was based on diagnostic codes.
Right. That's another limitation. They didn't have, detailed doctor's notes or brain scans or cognitive test scores for everyone.
So it's based on the diagnosis code used for billing.
Pretty much. Which might not always capture the nuances, or maybe there are differences in how readily doctors assign that code in different healthcare settings.
Which leads to the point about healthcare access differences between the VA system and commercial insurance?
Exactly. Access to specialists, how often people see doctors, the criteria used for diagnosis.
Yep.
Those things could differ and potentially introduce some bias.
And one more big one, genetics. Alzheimer's has a strong genetic component for some people. Was that factored in?
No, the study didn't have genetic information for these individuals. They didn't know who carried risk genes, like APOE4, for example.
And that could definitely play a role.
It could. If, just by chance, the people taking these drugs also happen to have a lower genetic risk, that could skew the results. It's another unmeasured factor.
So lots of reasons to be, cautiously optimistic, but definitely needing more proof. What are the researchers themselves saying now?
Well, Dr. J. Krishna Ambati, who led this study, he really emphasizes that significant and substantial risk reduction they saw. He points to that potential to prevent a huge number of cases globally each year.
So he sounds pretty convinced by the data they have so far.
He does, but he's also looking forward. He mentioned they're actually developing a new drug called K9.
K9, what does that do?
It's designed specifically to block those inflammasomes, maybe even more effectively or safely than the existing human immunodeficiency virus drugs.
Ah, so a more targeted approach based on this same idea.
Exactly. And it's apparently already in clinical trials for other conditions involving inflammation.
And the plan is to test it for Alzheimer's prevention, too.
That's the plan, yes. It's a really interesting next step.
So the research team as a whole, they see this as strong support for the inflammation theory of Alzheimer's.
Definitely. They believe targeting inflammasome activation is a really promising strategy. And they're pushing hard for those prospective clinical trials, either with the existing nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors or maybe with new drugs like K9.
And just to circle back to that point about other human immunodeficiency virus drugs not showing the effect.
Yeah, they see that as really strengthening their case. It makes it less likely that it's just about treating the virus somehow, and more likely that it's about this specific inflammasome blocking action of the nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. That specificity is pretty compelling.
So pulling it all together, what's the main message for people listening as we wrap this up?
I think the key takeaway is that this study points towards a really exciting, potential new way to tackle Alzheimer's prevention.
What?
But, and it's a big but, we absolutely need more research, especially those rigorous clinical trials to confirm these results and check the safety and effectiveness properly before anyone considers using these drugs for Alzheimer's prevention.
Right. This is research findings, not clinical advice yet. And for you, the listener, what's maybe the broader thing to reflect on from this?
Well, I think it shows something fascinating about medicine, doesn't it? How drugs developed for one specific thing
Like treating a virus.
can sometimes have these completely unexpected beneficial side effects on totally different conditions. It really highlights how interconnected our biology is.
And it also underlines how important it is to understand the deep down mechanisms of diseases like Alzheimer's, like this inflammation link.
Exactly, because understanding those mechanisms, like the role of inflammasomes here, can lead you to look at existing drugs in a new light or design entirely new ones.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As we learn more and more about biology, could we find more hidden treasures like this in our existing medicine cabinet?
Could drugs for, say, cholesterol or blood pressure or viruses hold keys to treating or preventing diseases we currently struggle with, like dementia or maybe even some cancers?
It suggests there might be faster, maybe more cost-effective ways to find new therapies hiding in plain sight.
It's definitely a profound thought. This study certainly gives us something really interesting to consider about how much potential might still be unlocked within the drugs we already have.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.